Over the past couple of months, we have once again been confronted with the reality of how seemingly out of touch so many Christians are with the realities of living in poverty.
Listen, Snowflake, you visit some places where they really hold you down, okay? You're not held back. You're a whiner. Everybody's all worried about everybody's feelings these days. I'm not worried about your feelings. I'll make a living hurting your feelings.
We witnessed Trump refuse to fund SNAP benefits during the government shutdown, and many Christians respond with either indifference or sometimes even praise.
Good luck, because chances are you'll never get EBT again. It is not income to help you survive so you could be lazy. You need to go to work.
They believe that the church should be handling things like caring for the poor and not the government. Then we saw TikToker at Nickley.Monroe conduct a social experiment where she called a bunch of churches saying that she was the mom of a 2-month-old baby, she couldn't afford to feed her baby, and was just asking for a can of formula. And then most of these churches respond with confusion and basically say, we don't do that here, or our giving program is for members only.
A 2-month-old, and I ran out of formula last night, so she's gone all night and all day without formula. I was wanting to see if there's any way y'all could get like a small can of baby formula.
I'm not aware of any programs that we have like that.
Well, like I said, if it's anything like that, our benevolence is for our members.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
How can Christians claim to be charitable and yet treat people in poverty as if it is their own moral failure that they're in that situation? This is what we'll be discussing in today's episode. Welcome to the Fundy Diaries. Hi, I'm Christine, and I grew up Christian fundamentalist, Christian nationalist, and was homeschooled. On this podcast, we discuss Christian culture in America, conservative politics, as well as the history of Christianity and its sociological impacts. So, why are these churches not wanting to give to a starving baby, or not even prepared to meet that need at all? One reason is just simply bureaucracy. A lot of these churches are run like businesses, and when you have a business that gets big enough, it's like, oh, that's somebody else's department. Oh, I don't do that. Oh, so-and-so is supposed to handle that, etc. Things just like get lost in the mess of it all. But what about when they do have a giving program and it's just not meant for you? Well, deep down, the reality is that the people at these churches do not trust you. If they don't know you, they don't want to help. They assume that either you're a scam artist or you're simply just going to waste whatever they give you because they believe you're in that situation because of your own bad choices. That is why you need Jesus, not just a handout. When you believe the devil is lurking around every corner to trick you and that every single person is a sinner, it naturally makes you very mistrustful of people. I feel like Dave Ramsey is probably the most prominent figure in Christianity as far as promoting this way of seeing the world. He's been on the scene for a very, very long time, and his version of financial advice really just promotes the belief that everything is your fault, ultimately. Every bad financial situation that you are in is because of your own stupidity. He really, really loves the word stupid.
Stupid! Stupid! Somebody ought to smack you into next week!
He says in his book called Baby Steps, Millionaires, which is a weird title that I find a little creepy.
I don't think the biggest problem we have today is structural or systemic. The biggest problem we have today is a breakdown in belief. People are believing the wrong things. And when you believe the wrong things, you make bad decisions because your worldview is screwed up.
This particular chapter of the book is dedicated to the victim mentality. He does acknowledge that some people have unfair advantages in life, but basically says that if you stay poor, you basically are just letting the victim mindset win, and you will stay poor forever until you change your mind. All it takes is hard work to get wherever you want to be. Anyone can be a millionaire with hard work. This is the bootstraps mentality, of course. But let's review, why is this mentality harmful? Well, the bootstraps mentality is at its core a shame-based worldview. I feel like modern day Christians really love the bootstraps mentality because it fits very well with the Bible's shame-based view of you being a sinner at baseline. It takes all the responsibilities of all the challenges that you've had in life and places it solely on yourself. From the moment you were born, you are nothing but a total sinner that deserves hell. And all the sins that you have committed in your life are simply your own bad choices. And for the people that are already flying into the comments, I am not saying that you shouldn't take responsibility for your life. I am simply critiquing the sort of overuse of extremely critical self-judgment in order to sort of get desired behaviors out of yourself, because that just doesn't work. I believe that in reality, we are all much more interconnected than people like to think in this individualist culture that we live in. And placing all the blame solely on yourself doesn't make sense. I don't think that it's a fair judgment. And interestingly, this blame shifting technique is also what narcissists use to shift the blame of things going wrong onto the person that they have power over. Narcissists keep their power by making sure that the person under their boot feels like everything is their fault. And I also find it very interesting that large organizations such as churches, organized religions, huge corporations function like narcissists in the world and use the same blame shifting technique. These large organizations want to avoid accountability for all of the harm that they're bringing to the world, and so they make it the consumer's fault instead. A very, very classic example of this is the ad of the crying Native American man looking at how the American people have trashed his land.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
This ad was produced in the 70s and was extremely popular, very impactful. So popular that even I know about it and I was not alive when it was happening. But who do you think funded this ad? Some sort of environmental protection group? Oh no. This ad was created by Keep America Beautiful, a nonprofit front organization established by major packaging and beverage companies such as Coca-Cola, Dixie, and more. This ad was created specifically to guilt trip the American public for the problem of plastic waste. They wanted to shift blame onto the consumer so that they could avoid the government stepping in and regulating their production process, requiring them to use less plastic. And guess what? It was very successful. Much of the environmentalist talking points from that point on were very focused on anti-littering, rather than about having the government regulate the use of plastic. All of these companies know that they are harming the environment, or even harming people in the case of companies like vape and tobacco companies, gambling companies, even social media companies. They all know their product is addictive and bad for people, but they sleep better at night imagining that it is the consumer's free choice to participate or not. However, this fails to acknowledge the extreme power imbalance between the consumer and large corporations. These corporations pay millions of dollars researching consumer psychology. They know exactly how to manipulate you into doing what they want you to do. And I'm going to go back to talking about Dave Ramsey here. A key part of Dave Ramsey's program is that he's very much anti-debt. He really believes that credit card debt is stupid. If you get into credit card debt, you are stupid. He's only okay with home loans, and he's only okay with a 15-year home loan. But what happens when I go and get my mail every week? I have to sift through maybe a dozen offers for credit cards. I've been pre-approved. No interest for 18 months. So many rewards. You're really missing out if you don't get this credit card. Every time I open Google, my email, social media, Netflix, YouTube, I'm bombarded with ads for credit cards, easy loans, payday loans, car loans. Calling you simply stupid for getting into credit card debt simply does not acknowledge the extreme power imbalance between you and these credit card companies. Not to mention the fact that these credit card terms of use are written by highly paid lawyers to be intentionally confusing and hard to understand. They want you to not be able to understand what the terms are so that you will make a mistake and end up paying interest you didn't even intend to. Why do you think they give you such a great deal of 18 months interest-free? Because they know a high percentage of people just will not be able to pay off the card within 18 months. It's as simple as that. Their entire business model is to trick you into getting into debt and staying there. They spend millions in learning how best to do it, and they spend millions in aggressively advertising it to you. Can you imagine if one day credit card companies, like cigarette companies, were simply just not allowed to advertise? It's not like everyone would just stop using credit cards and then the credit card companies would go out of business. Everybody needs access to credit sometimes. But there'd probably be way less unnecessary debt accrued by average, ordinary people. These companies' behavior is intentionally predatory. And that's why I believe that there should be regulation on the advertising of products that are highly addictive. And I believe that includes things like social media, credit card debt, etc. The government exists to address power imbalances between people that have power and people that don't. And that includes huge corporations with tons of money and ordinary consumers. But people like Dave Ramsey and most fundamentalist Christians function with the worldview of individual responsibility. They don't see a collective responsibility to protect each other from harm. Each person is alone on their journey in an individualist society. And this creates a recipe for a shame-based worldview because everything is your fault. It's also a recipe for not understanding when you are crossing the boundaries of somebody else, because ultimately you're failing to recognize how everyone and everything is actually interconnected. So all these Christians are very individualist, but was Jesus an individualist? No. He was a nomad who encouraged the rich to give away all their money to the poor, encouraged them to throw a feast and invite the marginalized rather than the elite, and called out the religious elite for hypocrisy. You know what he did not preach about? Low taxes and property rights. So when did Christianity start worshiping at the altar of money and individual rights? Okay, this is the turning point. This is when we're going to get deep into the history. I have been wanting to do this research for a really long time, and I'm so glad that I finally did. If you struggle, like many of us, with feeling that your only worth to society is how much money you make, you might want to read into some of these sources as well. I pulled from multiple sources, but my key source in this research was Max Weber's famous work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. I actually read it. It was very dense, but it was a very helpful read. Max Weber is a very respected sociologist, and he was a key figure in the creation of sociology as a field. After reading this, let's just say I feel like I'm finally purging myself of the belief that my only value to society is how productive I am. So Max Weber started his research with the question, why are Protestants so much wealthier than Catholics? They worship the same God, the same figure Jesus, they have nearly the same Bible, but the Protestants seem much more okay with the accumulation of wealth, despite the fact that the Bible teaches you to give away your money to the poor. This paper was written in 1904, so over 100 years ago, there was already this association with Baptist, Methodist, etc., Protestant Christians, and the hoarding of wealth. So let's go back to what caused the Protestant Reformation, which was the split between the Catholic Church and Protestants. Martin Luther was the key figure in causing the Reformation to happen when he posted his 95 Theses on the door to the church in Wittenberg, Germany. I want to note here that Martin Luther was very, very much a focus in my homeschooling, tantamount to hero worship, I would say. He was painted as a brave hero, and Catholics were painted as extremely evil and oppressive. In my research now on the Reformation, I would say Martin Luther was definitely a complicated figure. He had a lot of valid grievances against the Catholic Church, but was also deeply intolerant of anyone that did not agree with him. He was also very anti-Semitic because the Jews rejected Jesus. And even though he criticized the Catholic Church for becoming extremely wealthy at the expense of the peasants, he was not truly on the side of the poor. Because of all the unrest caused by the Reformation, peasants went into open rebellion against their feudal lords. Luther swiftly condemned the rebellion and supported the extremely violent and brutal suppression of the rebels. Martin Luther's main grievance with the Catholic Church was with the selling of indulgences, which was basically a slip of paper releasing you from a certain number of days or years spent in penance or purgatory for sins that you had committed. Martin Luther believed that salvation was by faith in God alone, not by earthly good works, and he rejected the authority of priests, the Pope, etc. to forgive sins. Now, I want to make a note here. Yes, the Catholic Church was getting extremely wealthy off the sale of indulgences, but this wealth was still used to support some real charities for the public good, including hospitals. In fact, all hospitals at this time were charitable institutions set up by the church, and the Reformation actually destroyed the means of funding these institutions. Also, reformers theologically did not really agree with providing health care to the poor because they saw these health struggles as trials sent by God. So yes, Martin Luther is the indirect reason why healthcare is now a for-profit industry. So in addition to funding real charity, there was definitely a lot of corruption happening where the selling of indulgences was just becoming fundraising for vanity projects. St. Peter's Basilica, one of the most grand and beautiful buildings in the entire world, was funded with the sale of indulgences. It honestly reminds me so much of the obscene amount of money spent on megachurches today, but with far less artistic merit, let's be honest. Martin Luther saw the Catholic Church as abusing their power by preaching of mortal sins and going to hell to crowds of poor peasants, and then happily taking their money to remit these sins and then building huge churches with it. Ultimately, Luther saw salvation as an individual journey that the Christian must go on, that their accepting of God's grace was an internal belief, not an external act of penance. Max Weber cites this change in theology as the beginning of individualism in the church. I found this very, very fascinating. And I do feel like it's very true that this belief of it being an individual journey and a personal belief definitely places you kind of just alone on that journey. John Calvin, a Protestant reformer who came after Luther, took this a step further with the doctrine of predestination. He wanted a solution for the paradox of free will. So he decided that since God is omniscient, he must have decided before the beginning of time who would choose to accept this gift of grace and go to heaven, and who would reject it and go to hell. This even further erases the idea of good works getting you into heaven, as every step of humanity has already been predetermined by God. So if your salvation is already predetermined, you don't actually have free will. Your life on earth essentially goes from a consistent, act of penance and good works to make up for your sins, to basically just being a struggle to prove to yourself that you are one of the elect that was already chosen before the beginning of time. And let's be honest, proving to others as well. Max Weber connects this belief to the idea of determinism, that everything has already been determined from the beginning of time. And basically he says that through this belief in predestination, the idea of determinism sort of entered culture as a whole. And that this is where the idea of a calling in life came from. I think it's pretty common today that we all think of ourselves as having a calling in life or some sort of predetermined journey that we are supposed to go on, and that our life is essentially about trying to figure out, what is this path in life? What is this thing I'm called to do? What was I made to do? What am I meant for? All of these things are actually very deterministic in nature, and at the core mean that we are believing that a path has been set out for us before we were born by some sort of higher power. So life becomes a struggle to prove to yourself that you are one of the elect. But this struggle creates a lot of existential anxiety. Am I living the way one of the elect would live? Has the devil actually tricked me and I'm actually going to hell? The institutions of the Catholic Church actually provided some relief for this anxiety, with the sacraments of confession, earthly good deeds, and giving money to charity. You're actually doing something to be a good Christian versus just sort of sitting around hoping that you've already been chosen. So Protestants are experiencing all of this existential anxiety, and the only relief provided through Protestant theology for this anxiety is just private confession in like personal prayer. If you're feeling guilty about something, you can repent and pray to God and ask for Him to forgive your sins. But psychologically, this does not have near the same effect as confessing to another person who can actually speak back to you. This is a huge reason why step 5 in Alcoholics Anonymous is actually admitting to God, yourself, and another human being the exact nature of your wrongs. This is also why so many people find therapy to be helpful. I feel like in some ways, confession to the priest was sort of like as close as the Middle Ages was going to get to a form of therapy. So Protestants have all this existential anxiety with no Bible-approved way to relieve it. Good works have become heavily demonized simply because the Catholics focus so much on them. All this anxiety needs a coping mechanism. But especially among Puritans in the post-Reformation period, almost all forms of earthly enjoyment and frivolity come to be seen as temptations to sin. If you drink, you might drink too much. If you dance, you might be tempted to lust just from the sight of someone else dancing. Recreation of any kind on Sunday was seen as a distraction from Sunday services, and piety and self-denial was praised above all. Voltaire actually wrote about Calvin and the other reformers who were very powerful in the city of Geneva, Switzerland. If they condemned celibacy in the priests and opened the gates of the convents, it was only to turn all society into a convent. Shows and entertainments were expressly forbidden by their religion, and for more than 200 years there was not a single musical instrument allowed in the city of Geneva. They condemned auricular confession, but they enjoined a public one, and in Switzerland, Scotland, and Geneva it was performed the same as penance. The Protestants were, in many ways, an extremist reaction to the worldliness found in the Catholic Church. They were deeply intolerant and even violent towards Catholics. They even came to see all religious iconography in the churches as basically idol worship. And when Protestants would take over a town, they would take over the Catholic Church and then they would whitewash over all of the beautiful frescoes created by Renaissance painters, smash stained glass windows, and demolish statues. All of this beautiful art created as a way to glorify God, they destroyed it. So what coping mechanisms do you have left when you have no fun, no art, and white walls? Work. Hard work. After all, idle hands are the devil's playthings. So this existential anxiety, this framework of seeing life as a calling, and this extreme focus on self-control and hard work combine to create the Protestant work ethic. So the Protestant work ethic creates this mass of people willing to work hard for the sake of work itself. Throughout all of human history, people have generally worked hard enough to provide for themselves and their families, and then that's it, they stop. The only way to extract more labor from somebody is to enslave them. Because if you pay them fairly, they will simply just stop working once they have enough money. They don't care about how much their boss wants. They just want to have enough to get by themselves and support them and their family. Of course, there have always been outliers as far as greed and the accumulation of wealth, but in general, society saw these behaviors as being antisocial and the hoarding of resources that should be shared. Max Weber cited in his paper a study on farmers who had attempted to pay their harvest workers more in order to get them to work faster and longer hours during the critical harvest period. They thought making more money per unit would encourage the harvesters to want to work more, but they found that raising the pay of workers actually caused them to work less. Overall, more often, they opted to have more time back rather than more money. On the inverse, they found that they got the result they wanted, the harvesters to work more, if they actually paid them less. So at that point, they had to work more hours just to get by. This is why businesses like to pay slave wages, because it is the best way to extract the amount of labor from their employees that they want. That's not to mention the fact that today you can't really get a job as an employee, not a contractor, that isn't set at 40 hours a week or 20 hours a week. I believe this lack of flexibility in the number of hours that you work, as well as the trap of being a salaried worker, are inventions used to keep people trapped in doing way more work than they actually want to. But people infected with the Protestant work ethic see work as actually the ideal of how to fill your time, since free time is just a temptation to give in to the flesh. And then culturally, if you see all these fun and leisure activities as just temptations to sin, what naturally follows is all this money you're making working has nowhere to go. You're working so much, you don't even have time to spend it on things like vacation, fancy food, fancy clothes, or anything ostentatious. So where does all this money go? Well, you need to be a good steward of whatever God has given you, right? So you do this smart and responsible thing. You save it. And Max Weber cites this as sort of like the fuel for capitalism, because these banks become so incredibly wealthy that they're able to continue to finance the building of more and more industry. Never before had so many people been so incredibly pious and self-controlled that they were able to save so much money. So this propensity toward hard work combined with this self-denial of earthly pleasures created the perfect breeding ground for capitalism. Never before had there been such a willing and devoted workforce and such a cultural value on self-discipline and saving. These ascetic virtues created generational wealth for Protestant families. But why was all this excess wealth not being given to the poor when Protestants still claim to support things like charity? Because the Protestant belief system ultimately sees wealth as a blessing from God for all of your hard work and good stewardship of everything that He has given you. It also sees being poor as a lack of faith in God for providing for you if you work hard enough, a lack of faith in yourself that you can make it just like everybody else, and often proof that you were not a good steward with whatever you had before you became poor or homeless. Such as you had a job, but you were a lazy worker and you lost it. Or you had money, but you gambled it all away. Or you had a life and friends, but you became a drunk and lost it all. Essentially, your position in life is a natural consequence of your behavior. And if I were to step in and give you a handout, I am actually preventing God from teaching you a lesson. If we go back to Baby Steps Millionaires by Dave Ramsey, he says the biggest problem in society is a lack of belief. By this, he does mean a breakdown of belief in God, but also a breakdown in belief in the supposedly egalitarian system of capitalism. I believe he sees life as egalitarian in nature. Basically, that essentially in life you get what you deserve. And if you bring more value to the marketplace, you deserve more. So we don't have anyone walking around today calling themselves Puritans. And in general, we don't have people being so incredibly pious that they don't drink, they don't enjoy sports, they don't dance, etc. Some of the most fundy Christians, they are kind of Puritan though, let's be honest. So we don't have this extreme pious behavior, but we still have the Protestant work ethic, even if you're not religious at all. And I believe this is because the system of capitalism has become so dominant in the world that its ethic is actually what makes the world go round. It's like an invisible ethical system that sits underneath whatever ethical system you personally subscribe to. It permeates everything, like the fish swimming in water that doesn't know what water is. Whether you like it or not, you're born into a world that values hard work and productivity above everything else. This is why you feel guilty when you sit down and watch TV in the middle of the day. This is why you can't stop thinking about work when you go on vacation. Today, we have a world that tries to engage in leisure, but has the generational trauma of being told that leisure is sinful. And going off on a little bit of a tangent here, I really believe that this generations of piety has really contributed to the sort of cultural vacuum we have in the United States. Like, I know that America is a younger country, but if you think about like what is an American thing, such as like things found in the Midwest or Texas, you look around and you find there's really not much to speak of that isn't directly linked to capitalism. Nothing to speak of except chain restaurants, gray office buildings, and bland food that you can get pretty much anywhere. I'm generalizing here, but from my own experience, this feels like the only culture that white people in America have. But you might say, what about our native culture that we brought over from Europe like 400 years ago? Some of us much more recently than that. English, French, Italian, Scottish, or Irish culture. Where did that go? Well, what is culture exactly? Ritual, food, clothing, music, dance, storytelling. What creates a culture is not just the language that someone speaks, but the things that they do together as a community for fun. And so many of these people coming to America were these Puritans that had basically renounced their entire culture as sinful. And then, of course, they immediately turned this shame on whatever immigrants are coming behind them. It wasn't just a skin color thing, because even Scottish and Irish immigrants faced so much shaming for being supposedly barbaric and uncivilized. Doug Wilson, the megachurch pastor who wants to remove women's right to vote, carries this sentiment through to today.
My ancestor, I'm Scottish descent, and my ancestors were the last white men to be civilized. And just a matter of a few centuries ago, my ancestors were painting themselves blue and running naked into battle and conducting human sacrifice, and Northern Europeans were as savage as anything you could find on this planet, just a mere matter of centuries ago. And the thing that transformed that was the gospel, not genetic progress, not evolution.
This is why Black culture is so popular in America, because even though they were brought here as slaves and the white people tried very hard to erase their culture from them, they fought back. They kept their spirit and they took their culture and built on it despite horrifying oppression. I feel this is why so many white Americans have such a hard time just having fun. Why white people don't know how to dance. except for like highly regimented things like ballet or whatever. I'm generalizing, of course, but I'll speak from my own experience here. I am married to a Black man who is from the Congo in Central Africa. He came here when he was 16, and most of his siblings are here as well. When I met him, he not only introduced me to so much of the culture that I had been sheltered from, but he introduced me to his own culture. When his family welcomed me, I got to participate in this rich history of food, dance, fashion that had deep generational roots. I'm not joking, it's like I was seeing the world in color for the first time. It was a very stark difference from how I had grown up, especially because my family has its direct roots in this type of like pious, Puritan, no dancing, no drinking type of theology. Even though my parents were not as legalistic as their parents were, the generational scars of that deprivation are still there in me today. My husband is an amazing dancer, but every time I get on the dance floor next to him, I am so stiff, I can't relax, I can't shake the feeling of just being watched and feeling silly. I want to just sort of let go and like be free and be myself, but there is such a deep feeling of just feeling frivolous, basically. Being made fun of and ridiculed for whatever is pretty common in the culture where I come from. So it's not really that strange that I can't shake that feeling. And you know what? I am really sick of it. I do not want to live like this anymore. So, in summary, Christians in general believe that if you are poor, it's because you are lazy and you act like a victim. God is teaching you a lesson through your poverty, and so I better not intervene. It's really just a theological excuse to be selfish, dehumanize others, and to remain completely blind to systemic power structures that don't affect you personally. It's very sad. I feel like it's very far from the message that Jesus came to preach. I feel like his whole thing was actually calling out systemic power structures that were oppressing people, especially religious ones. And I just really hope that one day Christians will realize how much they have strayed from the message of Jesus. Some of them certainly are realizing this right now, and that is really good news to see. But I really hope to see a much bigger systemic change in the evangelical church itself. Anyway, that's all I have for you in this podcast today. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to keep up with future episodes of the podcast, you can subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.